Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about A.H. Reid's Larnach and His Castle. So this is a history/promotional material, I think. So it's about what's regarded as the only castle in New Zealand. Larnach's Castle, built by William Larnach in the 1800s, the latter portion of the 1800s. Larnach himself called it the camp. That was his name for the estate and the castle, but most people call it the castle. So this was published for Larnach Castle Limited, which is what makes me think that this is really sort of a promotional piece of material. But promotional is maybe the wrong word. I don't mean in the sense of like, oh, we're sending this out to try and get people to come to the castle, more in the sense of like you would visit the castle and this would be in the gift shop, right? Or something like that. Like you could purchase this from the gift shop so you get more information about the place that you've just been. That kind of thing is what I'm talking about here. It's sort of a two-part history, basically. The first part is a biography of William Larnach, and this starts on page 6. It starts on page 6 and goes through page 14, so it's a fairly short bio. And then the entire document is 29 pages. So, I mean, it's a short bio, but it takes up a reasonable chunk of the total. And then the remainder of the book is a description of the castle itself, the construction style, the building materials, what types of materials were used, where they came from, what the sort of inspirations for the architectural designs were, etc., etc. All this stuff, right? As well as the history of ownership. So William Larnach himself owned it, and then after his death by suicide, what was the sort of subsequent chain of ownership, and different pieces of the collection. Like, Larnach was a big book collector, apparently. He had a lot of rare books, particularly about Australia, which is where he was actually born, before moving to New Zealand for the majority of his political and financial career. So, like, he had a big collection of books about Australia, about New Zealand, about the South Pacific in general, and so that collection was sort of sold off separate from the house, etc., etc. So you get all of these details. There is also sets of pictures. We get one picture of Larnach himself. We get one political cartoon about Larnach getting reelected to a particular office in 1893, the parliamentary election for the Peninsula seat. We get a facsimile of one of Larnach's letters, but all of the other pictures throughout, these are all details of the castle itself. So, yeah, it's very, like, if you want to learn about this castle, the camp, like, you're getting decent details, and I mean, that's a picture of it. It's kind of, it's nice-ish. I mean, if you want a castle. So I read this because I'm actually doing research for an article about the history of Larnach and his death, the events surrounding his death, and so and how his family life may have played into his suicide. So I will share with you the relevant 2 bits of this for me. So Larnach committed suicide. He shot himself in an office in Parliament House. And I'll tell you why. What's interesting about this as a piece of history, after I've told you these 2 bits of information. What Reed says about Larnach's death: his death in tragic circumstances at Parliament House on the 12th of October, 1898, was attributed to a nervous breakdown due to worry and ill health. His death in tragic circumstances is how Reed explains the suicide. And part of what's fascinating about the death of William Larnach is that supposedly, according to rumors, he might have found out, or the... Okay, I don't want to put the qualifier on that. His third wife, whom he was married to at the time, might have been having an affair with his youngest son, who I think was a son from a previous marriage. So basically, she was his stepmother, he was her stepson, right? There are rumors that they were having an affair and that Larnach found out about this, and that, along with financial setbacks, collapse of some of his businesses, etc., that is what led to his suicide. What Reed says about Larnach's family, his family life: Larnach, who was thrice married, was survived by his third wife. He left by his first wife 2 sons and 4 daughters. He died intestate. That's all. So the reason that I find that interesting, and the reason that I thought it was worth talking about here, and what I'm talking about in the article that I'm writing about this, is this was published in 1950. So what's unclear to me is whether... So the not mentioning suicide, right? The euphemism of in tragic circumstances, totally understandable for the 1950s. For 1950, right? New Zealand, relatively socially conservative at the time. They're much more progressive now, but I think my sense is they're socially quite conservative. What I find really interesting here is the question of whether it is Reed being tactful and leaving out the rumors of incest, right? Whether he said, it's 1950 in New Zealand. We have quite a socially conservative society. I don't know that I want to bring up potential rumors of incest in this family, particularly in something promoting the castle itself. Whether he did not know about this, whether in his research into Larnach and his castle and the biography of him, etc., these rumors just never came up, although they would come up for later biographers who do address them. Or whether, because what he says in the introduction is, it is proposed here to narrate such of its annals as can be substantiated by reliable evidence. So the third possibility, from a historical perspective, a historian's perspective, right, is that Reed was aware of this rumor, would have theoretically been willing to publish it, although I kind of doubt that, to be honest, given the euphemism for Larnach's suicide, but simply didn't believe that the rumors were credible enough. Right? So it's an interesting issue in terms of these questions of how we construct histories, right? What is considered reliable enough evidence to say this is part of the story, and we can't tell the story without telling this component of it, right? That's a really interesting issue whenever we're reading any sort of history, because when we're reading a history, we are reading the choices that a historian has made in terms of what does and does not get included. And that's significant, right? Because things can be excluded for reasons of a lack of evidence. They're too speculative. Things can be excluded for reasons of tact in tragic circumstances rather than he shot himself. Things can be included that perhaps should not be because maybe the evidence isn't that reliable, but it fits with the story that the historian is telling, etc., etc. So all of these things shape the ways in which history is told. And it's a question that's always worth asking when we're reading history is, what is going into this? Right? The other thing that I find really fascinating about this is the ways in which Reed supports his claims with evidence to the extent that he does, right? Often they are simply unsupported. And this was a very typical 1950 way of writing history, right? You didn't have the robust system of citations that you would expect to have in a contemporary history piece, right? There's no this is the last page, right? There's no like works cited references for further reading, any of that kind of stuff. It just doesn't exist. And you wouldn't normally necessarily expect it in 1940s, 50s histories. So the closest we get to anything resembling contemporary citations is, for instance, he refers to the Otago Witness. The paper as a whole, newspaper as a whole. What article? What journalist? What day? Not specified. We have these quotations with no indication of where they come from. His Excellency's Minister of Mines and Marine, that was one of the portfolios that Larnach held at one point in the government, came very near relinquishing his portfolio altogether. Don't have a clue who said that. And then we've got things like this reference to the chronicler of the tour. No indication of who that is. So yeah, I mean, again, it's interesting because again, it functions as this sort of local history / buy this in the gift shop and get more info type deal, right? And yet there are these sort of questions about the historiographic methodology that comes with it, which I think are very interesting.